Hello and welcome to the show. Now, a lot of the racing that I do on Forza 6 is very much based around the class system, and certainly when it comes to me building a car, whether it versus the community or various other races, challenges and so on, I have tended to pick a vehicle that is 2 or 3 classes below where I want it to end up. Of course, there have been the odd exception, but take this Holden, for example. This one is the car that I used in the Manufacturer's Cup. It starts off as a very, very low D-class car, and it was upgraded to A. Now, the reason why I do this often is that you get a lot more options. You can put a huge amount of upgrades on this car because it starts off at such a low PI. You can go for full handling, race tyres, race weight reduction, and so on, or you can get a huge amount of power in the vehicle and then put on the bare minimum handling parts required to keep it in a straight line. So there's a lot of choice with vehicles like this. However, of late we've seen a couple of quite surprising cars go quickly in versus the community, and this 911 really kind of got me thinking about these cars that have much higher starting PIs. If I'm going for an A-class car, I'll tend to completely and utterly ignore any vehicles that start off in A-class, because you simply don't have very many parts that you can put on the car. This 911 had to have quite a compromised build in some respects just to keep it within the A-class for the autocross. However, it still went incredibly quick, and this got me thinking about whether it was better to start off with a faster car. Of course, the 911 from standard is far, far quicker than the Monaro from standard, but you can't do as much to it, or whether it was better to have one of the low starting PI cars and do a lot of upgrades to them, because then you got more choice, sort of how you like them. Now, I will admit that to do this scientifically would be incredibly difficult because there's so many different combination of builds and tracks and so on. So we kind of, this kind of more for a general trend rather than sort of pinpoint accuracy on the overall theme. We set about doing 3 races with some different classes. We're going to go C, B and A class. We're starting with a C class cars here at Catalunya National. Now, some of these vehicles started off in C class, such as my Porsche, there's a Supra, there's all sorts of different vehicles in here that started off in C class, while the rest would have started off in kind of E low D class. So there are some cars here with a huge amount of upgrades, or a relatively large amount of upgrades anyway, to make them into this class, and others that have very, very little in the way of them. The start of the race was, well, as you would expect, a Catalunya race, to go a little bit of bumping into that very, very nasty turn one. I think people were trying to go 3 wide at the top of the hill. Amazingly, they all survived it, which is yeah, quite a feat. That is a nasty corner at the top of the hill. That's a very, very nasty corner, but everyone made it through. I was coming under fire from a Gibble that then locked up and ran a little bit wide. One of the surprise cars that was doing quite well at the front, the Alfa Romeo P3, it does start off in C class. I mean, the oldest car in Forza, very little in the way of upgrades that could be done to this car, and it was actually holding on. At the start of this race, a Mercedes 280 was leading the way, chased down by a Camaro. There was an S2000 in the mix, an Opel GT as at this stage. Yeah, this Alfa, we were expecting it to absolutely plummet through the field. And certainly it was a handful through the corners. It made up for it, though, with some impressive straight-line speed, absolutely blitzing past the S2000 as it gives chase towards the Camaro further up. Yeah, P3, difficult to get it through the turns, but it was incredibly fast down the straights. Now, of course, there are always going to be leaderboard cars in the various classes, and well, we tried our best to avoid using the 2 kind of overpowered vehicles. The TZ2s are very, very quick. These Alfa Romeos, they do start off relatively high C-class cars. They are monumentally fast, though. Around just about anything. I have built one. I have used one before. They are, yeah, very good cars. While these 2 did start down towards the back of the field, they had an awful lot of work to get through the field just from sheer volume of cars ahead of them. They were making short work of some of these, as this Alfa kind of fires himself through the middle of a Datsun. I can't remember what he was on the outside. MR2, I think, is on the outside. He's getting past a Golf, and he's going to try and outdrag the Skyline. There's a Scirocco on the outside as well. Can't quite do it, so it runs out of a little bit of space. They are so small and light that the curbs can be quite vicious to them around here, and you don't really want to have contact with anything, because just about everything is giant compared to them. You saw the bump it got from the side of the Golf. Yeah, the TZ2s were making their way up through the order. The S2000 was doing pretty well at the front. The Mercedes was struggling a little bit through these corners. Just didn't quite have the grip to compete with some of these cars. The Honda goes around the outside of the 280 as they start the climb up the hill, but the Mercedes has got the power to come back at him as they run up here. The Mercedes is on the wide line. It's not really where you want to be. The wheel on the grass just about keeps it all together, but would lose the position to the Honda and to the Dodge as well. My Porsche was awful. I'll be honest. It was it was not a good car. I was really struggling with this 911. I'd hoped it might be a half decent car. I just couldn't get any speed out of the vehicle. It was being passed by just about everything as I was trying to fight my way past a GTO. It's about one of the very few cars that I actually overtook in this entire race. Up ahead, Maserati was having a fight with the Alfa Romeo as I run the GTO out wide. Just get such a better drive off of the hairpin. I can't do anything about it. There was an RX-7 was now having a look up the inside. There's a Tiger is around the background trying to find a way past. In the end, the understeer gets the better of me in the 911 as I try to push the car. The TZ2 is going to make the most of that. I had not built a good car in this at all. It was just not quick enough to compete with a lot of the vehicles. As I said, the Alfa Romeo, the P3, was doing admirably well. He was holding on to a second place at this stage of the race, and the cars behind could not find a way past. A TZ2 had caught up to this. There was a Buick Regal as well, all trying to find a way past, but none of them really had an answer. They did a great job with keeping this car under control, and that huge straight line speed was coming in very handy. There was an S2000 around as well, a little bit slow on the straights, that Honda, but then would catch up through the corners. All of these vehicles that were currently leading this race were cars that started off in C-Class. I mean, the Camaro that was leading only had about 19 PI to play with. The Buick certainly didn't have very much. Neither did the Alfa P3. So they were doing very well with the sort of competitiveness. One thing we were seeing is that it was very easy to mess up the build with these high PI cars. While yes, they were leading, much like my Porsche, there were other cars that were struggling. The Gibble wasn't doing particularly well. Neither was the Supra. It was much easier to, build an utter lemon of a car, really, when you have much less kind of PI to work with. Because you've got to sort of pick and choose your upgrades, and if you've got it slightly wrong, these things could really suffer. They could really struggle. I mean, yes, of course, there are there are the bad luck things that can happen with racing and so on, but immediately the trend that we were seeing is that, these high PI cars were much easier to mess up with. However, they could be very fast. This Camaro was pretty much untouchable at the front, got to the lead early on, and vanished away from the rest of the field. As I said, only 19 PI to play with this car. That is not very much at all, but still a very fast car. Unfortunately, the P3 would get a little bit of a bump on the final lap that would drop him out of the podium places, which is a shame because he did so bloody well to hold that car where he did for so long. The Buick would get second, getting up the inside of the S2000 on the final corners, and the TZ2 would be too much for the S2000 with that straight line speed to get third. The Honda in fourth. The highest placed of the cars that started with a low PI would be the Dodge, coming home in fifth. And next race, we went up into B class for a round at Laguna Seca. Again, a relatively interesting selection of vehicles. In general, the modern cars are the ones that have the highest starting PI. So, for example, this BMW, the Alfa Romeo 8C, the Mercedes and the Audis around, and so on. The classic cars tend to be the ones that can have a lot more upgrades. There are the odd exception, such as the TZ2s. In this race, I was driving my Mercedes SLR. There are little exceptions and so on, but that's the general easiest way, certainly, to kind of follow things. And this BMW was immediately coming under threat from, well, just about everything. He does manage to hold a good maneuver around the outside as a Mercedes gets a little tangle with a Mustang BMW to the inside. The Escort comes from an absolute mile back. It's almost 4 cars in one corner. The Mustang was too fast off of the turn, but Escort did a fantastic maneuver. The Corolla outdrags everything on the run up the hill. and the BMW is going to have to settle for losing a couple of positions. He did get the Alfa Romeo behind. There's all sorts of cars going 3 wide up towards the corkscrew as the Corolla and Escort are bumping doors. BMW's kind of stuck on the outside. Not a huge amount you can do around there. The Audi's having a go at a Mercedes. The 8C's on the dirt. They've all just about survived, though, through this this opening lap. It was, again, a rather frantic first lap. Again, though, we were also seeing some of these higher PI starting cars really struggling. Some of them were going quickly. This Ferrari, though, was not. It was really having a tough time. I love the 355, and it pains me to say this, but it was really not holding its own here against these cars. You saw everything just drove away from it in a straight line. The BMW M3 here comes from a long way back to get almost alongside. Almost had to look up the inside. It was miles back when they came on to the straight. The Ferrari had no straight line speed and wasn't particularly quick through the corners. And this is what I was saying at Catalunya, much like I had with my Porsche. You were much easier to mess up the build with one of these cars when you just don't have the options of parts and so on. I think the Ferrari sees the Nissan up ahead getting a huge slide of wheel on the dirt, and it's still not really able to do very much about it. The Nissan still gets going and was pulling away from the Ferrari. The M3 gets another position, making the most of that one, and the Ferrari's under threat from an Opel. The Opel would drive past it on the run up the hill, and these cars were still good enough through the corners that, yeah, there was nothing the 355 could do. And the front, it was Dodge Dart that was leading the way, absolutely miles out in front. A good battle, though, was going on over second place between me in the Mercedes, Lotus Esprit, and Alfa 75 was getting into the mix as well. We're being caught by an MX-5 in this one. The Esprit, very quick in a straight line. The Alfa, pretty damn fast in a straight line, but a great car around the corner. Went for a huge dive into turn 1. That is a very long way back to get that one stopped, get that one turned. The 75 was doing a good job. I was a little bit upset. My Mercedes, I have a very quick one of these Mercedes. Sadly, when I lost all my data, I equally lost the tune. I tried to rebuild it as best I could. It wasn't the same, though. It's not as good as my my previous racing Mercedes. So yeah, a little bit of a shame on that one. It was still, though, a pretty solid car. Alfa 8C was another vehicle that was struggling, was very much stuck in this incredibly crowded midfield group. It was a huge group of cars, this one, all fighting for position. And yeah, the modern cars, the cars with the high starting PI were struggling here. They were getting swamped by just about everything. They were trying their best to hold on. They were trying to put up a fight. And, certainly if you're attacking, if the car's out around having to defend and so on, they would be a little bit slower. They could try and make a nuisance of themselves, but in general, they were getting mullered. Out here, the Mercedes ran a bit wide into turn 1. He dropped to the back of the group. And the thing that we were seeing is once these cars kind of lost ground, they really struggled to really make it back up again. The Alfa got very close to the back of the Prowler, a little too close, would lose the run down the next bit. The NSX briefly got past. He managed to upbrake himself into the next turn, skating off into the gravel as the Prowler, the Clio, the BMW up ahead were all fighting for position, very nearly 3 wide at the top of the hill. I had made a little bit of a mistake and dropped back in the Mercedes. It was now very much a 4-way battle over second place as the MX-5 looked to try and find a way past the Esprit. Couldn't quite do it yet. Goes to the outside around the next turn. Again, there was just not quite finding the space. The Esprit was struggling massively with understeer, much as I had with my 911 at Catalunya. The Esprit spent quite a lot of time out on the sand around here, really fighting that car. It was a good car. It was a quick around a lap, but it was not an easy vehicle to drive. My Mercedes, again, was not a bad car, certainly. Not quite as good as my previous one. And yeah, I was having a little bit of trouble keeping up with some of these cars. It was a great battle. We were having good fun at the front here, but yeah, certainly the MX-5 and the 75 were handling a fair bit better than both me and the Lotus. This group back here continued for pretty much the entirety of the race, squabbling for position despite the NSX's slight moment earlier on. He would recover and fight his way through the order. The BMWs would go at it with the with the classic one finding a way past. It would then compromise his fellow BM. The Prowlers go around the outside. The Prowlers can actually be pretty decent cars. Tend to lack a little bit of straight line speed. They can be very, very good handling cars, and still the Prowler is stuck on the outside. The tiniest of tags causes a big moment for this BMW. Clio would seize the opportunity. He would get past. Now the Alphas coming to join in. Alpha on the inside. Mercedes is at the back of the group. But this is the thing that we saw. As I said, the Mercedes, the Alpha, they just couldn't make progress. They could fight with these cars for a little while, but in the end, once they got past, they would just vanish off up the road and they start fighting amongst themselves. But yeah, they were just kind of gradually dropping through the field. Mercedes pushed his luck a little too hard, ran wide at the top of the hill. That would put the BMW back alongside as we come up towards the corkscrew. We're going to go side by side down here. The Alpha would briefly break away to try and give chase to the cars up ahead, but just didn't have the handling through the tighter turns to really do very much about them. At the front, as I said, it was a Dodge Dart that was leading the way far faster than the rest of us. Yes, admittedly helped by some of our giant scrap for second place, but even so, yeah, this is a bloody fast car around here that none of us could really do much about. The Dart starts down in D class, so yeah, plenty of upgrading opportunities with this, and it was a seriously mighty fast car. The Alpha would end up in second ahead of the MX-5 as both me and the Esprit fell off the road on the final lap trying to make up positions. This battle went down to the wire as well between the 8C, the Mercedes, and the BMW. The Escort caught them massively in the end, just couldn't quite do anything, ran out of laps to get past them. The Mercedes would outdrag the BMW to the line, but this was all fighting, I think, well outside the top 10. These cars, they seriously struggled for pace. These vehicles up ahead, you can see that the Nissans and the Prowler and the Clio and so on, they vanished away from these guys once they got past. Our final race would go to the Silverstone circuit, the GP circuit. This one with the A-class vehicle, so we're starting to see a lot more of the supercars now coming into this one. The Shelby Daytona. Again, this is an A-class car. You would see a couple of the classic sort of Le Mans races are up into A-class. Daytona tries to go around the outside of a BMW, would get the move done. It's a good move, actually. It's quite a tough corner, that one, to hold it around the outside of the BMW. Just runs out a little bit of road. We're 2 and 3 wide up ahead. Not a good idea. The poor 360 Challenge is stuck well out on the grass, as is the Mercedes. Going for a little bit of an explore. BMW Z8 gets a great run off the turn. Absolutely flies down the straight. The Shelby's immediately under threat from a Lamborghini Diablo. That too gets up the inside as we come into these next couple of corners. The Shelby quick around these turns, but when there's a very wide Lamborghini in front of you, there's not really a huge amount that you can do. He sort of had a look at trying to go around the outside, but there was no match for the Diablo's acceleration off of the turn. The BMW Z8 is trying to make a move on something up ahead as there's all sorts of smoke going on. One of the cars that I will admit I was rather jealous of, the McLaren, the SLR Mercedes. This thing, it sounds absolutely fantastic, and while it does get passed by a Viper as they run down the old start-finish straight, the SLR has got so much straight-line speed. This thing is absolutely phenomenally fast. Look at it go up the inside into turn 1, and you can get it stopped. The Viper tries to do a cutback, but has got no answer to the McLaren's straight-line speed. It is an incredibly quick car, and of course with that supercharged engine, it does sound very, very nice. They were coming up against an Aston Martin. The Shelby Daytona was there as well, and while the Aston was a little bit better through these turns, and the Viper was better than the McLaren through the turns as well, tries to go around the outside. That's not a usual overtaking place, certainly. The Aston Martin did pull a little bit of a gap that would then immediately vanish from the straight line speed of the SLI, come flying past as they go into the braking zone of the next corner. Catch right up to the back of the Daytona. Got to be, of course, careful not to overrun the turn. The Aston tried to get to the inside, just wasn't quite gap, and in doing so compromised himself, and that then let the Viper to get past. I was running in second place using my 911, coming under threat though from the Lamborghini Diablo. Diablo had a little bit more straight line speed than me. I was a bit better through the turns. I wasn't quite good enough though through the corners to really be able to counter the Lamborghini. I gave it the best shot that I could as we cut to these final corners, but the Diablo would go defensive. I'm having to try and cut back, find any way that I can get to the inside of the car ahead. It just wasn't quite rim. I was faster through these turns, but there was nowhere really to go. The BMW Z8 was catching up, while a Ferrari Daytona was gradually dropping back through the order in the background. The Diablo is such a wide car, pretty much covered everywhere that I wanted to go through the turns, and I wasn't in any position to really find a way past. Again, Lamborghini defensive through this next turn, and I could carry good speed. I'm trying to cut back, but in doing so, I'm still going to be stuck on the outside for the next turn, and there was nothing really that I could do about the Lamborghini in the end, getting run a little too wide out of there, trying to find a way past, and just, yeah, couldn't quite do it, and all of that fighting was allowing the BMW to catch us up, which was slightly less than ideal. The Daytona was also gradually dropping back through the order, falling foul of the Dodge Viper next to the Mercedes. Mercedes had a very, very good straight line speed. That's an AMG Black Series, very quick car. But he tries fighting back again around these turns going to the outside. You can see the Ferrari Daytona as well. They were struggling. The Ferrari Daytona and the Aston Martin were gradually losing positions through this one. The Shelby does get his place back briefly from the Mercedes, but as soon as they got to the next straight, the Merc would be gone. The Ferrari was now right there behind as they run through the old turn one. They were all pushing absolutely on the limit through that next corner up towards Magus and Beckett's, and while the Shelby will be quick through here, the Mercedes can get such a lead by the time he gets into here and can defend through this section. Very, very difficult to get cars too wide through here, so the Mercedes can just place his car where he wants, and there's nothing really the Shelby can do at this particular stage in the race. I said the McLaren was making its way through the field rather quickly, caught up to the back of the BMW. I was trying my best. I did for a few laps fend off the Z8, and that quickly brought the SLR up into contention and immediately breezed past the BMW. This thing had so much straight line speed, but it was still very, very good through the corners. And the SLR starts off in a relatively high A-class car. There is not very many room for upgrades in that car, whereas the Z8 is, I think it's about C-class or something, is plenty of upgrades got into the BMW, but it had no answer to the speed of the McLaren. It wouldn't take long for the SLR to catch up to my Porsche either. The Viper was another one that was making good progress through the field. This thing, very, very quick car. While I was fighting with the McLaren, I got a wheel on the curb, tipped me sideways. We all got away with it. I came off worse of all of that. The BMW finally gets his chance to get to the inside of me, but he was going to get outrun by the Viper as we run through the next turn. It's side by side. If the BMW can hold it, you do get on the inside for the next turn, but the Z8 got a little bit caught out on the grass. The Viper goes the long way round. It is, I guess, a pretty tough, even with the Z8 getting a small moment on the grass, that's still a tough manoeuvre to do around the outside there. A very, very long corner. The Viper was now up into fourth place, and I was now looking at the back of the BMW with my Porsche. At the front of the race, it was a Ford GT that led from pretty much start to finish of this one. I had slightly quicker car through the corners, but had no answer for the GT's straight line speed. The Diablo ran out of laps to really do anything about catching the Ford, and this race was very much dominated by the high starting PI cars, the supercars, pretty much, with the GT taking a victory, Lamborghini in second, the SLR getting third, the Viper getting fourth, the BMW was the highest, the Z8 was the highest positioning low starting PI car in this one. Admittedly, though, a fair bit of that was down to some bad luck. To some of these low PI starting cars, they had been the odd bump and so on, and they got themselves into trouble. Some of them crashed on their own and dropped down the order. So yeah, there was a little bit of bad luck involved with some of them. This was a great final quarter scrap between a Corvette C4 and the Aston Martin V8 Vantage around the final turn. It is side by side as the two cars race towards the line. It was a remarkably close finish, these two. I had to go have a look in the camera mode. Now, the game gave it to the Corvette. The game gave it to the Corvette. I think it was the fight for about 16th place. Yeah, these are pretty damn close. Now, we've seen previously, Forza counts the finish line when the front wheels cross the line. That is what we've seen before, and it is, yeah, it's a very, very tough call between these two. They are incredibly evenly matched. It's got to be one of the closest finishes we've had, I think, in any of these races. So, what sort of conclusions can we draw from all of this? Well, when I set out to do this challenge, I was very much expecting the low PI starting cars, the ones that can have an awful lot of upgrades, to dominate. That's how I've tended to build and choose my cars for this sort of stuff. But it really wasn't the case in this racing. Now, of course, there are many variables when you have 24 cars going racing around a track, and while these low PI cars did very well in B class, the high PI cars did very well in the A class race and so on. There were other vehicles in the field that were going quickly, and there are many variables in this, but the overarching theme is that there was very little to choose between them. I think the main thing that I can draw from all of this is don't be afraid to pick a car that's only got 20 PI to play with. Don't just shy away from that. It can still be a very, very quick car. The Chimera that dominated Catalunya had very little in the way of PI to work with in C class, but it was a very, very fast car nevertheless, and it can work. And these things can be very, very good vehicles. A word of warning, though, is that certainly with these sports cars and the higher PI starting cars, it is much easier to mess up those builds. It is much easier to take one of those cars, you try and build it to whatever class, and for it to be terrible. Take the 911 I had at Catalunya. As much as I love the 911 Turbo, it's a great car. My build of it was not. That was not a fast car. Now, you may be able to build a fast C-Class one of them, but it is also much, much easier to completely and utterly mess that one up. The Ferrari 355 at Laguna struggled massively, and to the likes of the Mercedes and the BMW, the Alfa 8C and so on, they really struggled in that race. It wasn't through sort of falling off the road, accidents and so on. It was just they didn't have the pace. And not just down to driver skill. There were very, very quick drivers in those cars that just couldn't keep up. They just didn't have the speed in the cars to fight with some of the other vehicles. So, yeah, it was these higher PI starting cars can be fast, but they are also equally easy to mess up the build with them. So, yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful, but certainly I won't be shying away from using these potentially in the future. They did a lot better than I was expecting. I thought they were going to get hammered, and that really wasn't the case. That really was. I knew that there may be the odd ones. Take the BAC Mono leaderboard A-class car, and that's got no PI to play with. But I thought there might be the odd ones. I didn't expect them to kind of overall do as well as they did. So yeah, don't be afraid to have a go with these cars that have very little in the way of upgrades to do with them that you can get to keep them in the class, because they can still be very competitive. Just be aware that things can go a little bit wrong with them if you aren't careful. Anyway, that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.